before the Open comes out this year, I'll put out a list of top 100 male and female athletes going into this season. And there'll be times where you'll look at the list and you'll say, that's ridiculous. How can you have that person 20 spots higher than someone else when they lost to them at Wadapalooza or at Dubai or at Rogue? And it's because I'm not weighing those competitions as the most critical factor. What I'm looking at is the totality of their career.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Invictus Mindset Podcast. Today's guest is a CrossFit thought leader, the lead CrossFit analyst for Barbend, and a regular on the Sivan podcast. The one and only Brian Friend. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for the return invite.
Yeah, on for a second time. There's only a few of you guys that I've brought back for a second time, so clearly I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that means the first one went well.
Something like that for sure. Yeah, definitely got a world of knowledge, Brian. Like you're everywhere. You're all in all the time, pumping out amazing content. And I'm always just very fascinated at the intriguing rankings that you put out and all the knowledge that you possess in an ever-evolving sport like CrossFit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to have a good understanding of the totality of the landscape globally of international CrossFit at the highest level is something that you can't really go to sleep on. Every week, every month, every season, there's nuances that are changing and new athletes that are coming into the fray. So to try to keep all that straight requires a lot of attention to detail and what's going on globally, but also having a good network of friends and relationships that can to bounce ideas off of and share thoughts with.
Yeah, for sure. A term that I came across recently is titled brain nibbling. And what I kind of view with that is, when you're in your car, you probably have a podcast on, or you're on a call maybe with a fellow CrossFit thought leader. I'm sure you're getting text messages and DMs of all the changing landscape all the time. Maybe when you're, hopping in the shower, you got a CrossFit podcast on, or what is your version of brain nibbling to kind of keep up to date in something that has so much change and fast volatility?
There's more content out there than I can consume on my own. I think we both just acknowledged. I do try to stay in tune and in touch personally with the things that I feel are most relevant, but I also definitely rely on some other people to consume content that I don't necessarily have time to. I used to spend a lot of time in the car, and if you do have a 30 to 60 minute commute every day, you can certainly get a lot of stuff in during that time. Now I don't. It's maybe a 2-minute drive to the gym and back, so I'm hardly listening to anything in the car. But when I'm just doing things around the house, even when I'm writing or doing research, I often will put on some content in the background. But at the same time, I have to have a break. I can't do it 24/7. Mm-hmm. It's too much. So I usually also still have a certain deadline at night or in the middle of the day where I'll just shut everything off and take an hour for myself to decompress from that stuff. And I find that that allows me to be fresh and focused on the times that I am attempting to, brain nibble, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. Isn't that term fascinating? I heard it from somebody and I was like, I'm definitely stealing that. It's kind of cool.
Well, it also seems like something that, a predator might do to its prey in the wild. So that's why I can't help but laugh when I hear you say
fair.
it.
Yeah, there's definitely a metaphor there for sure. When we look at the CrossFit athletes, something that I've heard you talk about before is there isn't really a true off season. They're constantly go, go, go. There's monetization within the sport. There's travel opportunities. There's appearances. There's throwdowns. There's miscellaneous things. We'll touch on that in a second. But for you, Brian, there's never an off season. Looking back, you and I were briefly chit-chatting when you were operating the Zelos games a little bit with Sivan and Jared Graybeal and, talking about the scoring system that was pretty fascinating at the time. But then fast forward, man, it's you go through the holidays and then we're right into Wadapalooza. You just got back from the Mayhem Athlete Camp. Now the Open is less than a month away. How on earth do you do this while still writing a ton of articles for Barbend?
Yeah, and coaching, 25 hours a week at the affiliate I coach at here.
Yeah, man, that's incredible.
And it's I couldn't really do a lot of the other stuff without having the backbone of that job and the leniency that the owners of the box give me to do these other jobs. In terms of an off season personally, even though I'm still working and producing stuff, it's the travel that kind of like pushes things over the top at times. Mm-hmm. So between now and semifinals, there's very little travel that I'll do. So even though there's a lot going on, it's not quite as stressful as some of the heavy traveling seasons. And then following the games up until about Rogue is usually also a little bit of a downtime for me. So those are the 2 periods of time that I think of as more of the off season from the intense schedule that traveling brings with it.
Yeah, totally. The downside, though, is typically in those lulls within the competitions, there's highs with regards to the management operations of the sport and the growth and development of managers, agents, brands, and the business side of sport that's kind of became a little bit louder recently. And so how do you manage some of that where, okay, maybe the athlete side of things is a little bit, dulled a little bit or pushed gently to the background, but then all of a sudden the business focus kind of floats to the forefront and it's like, all right, now we got to chat about that.
Yeah, and this year in particular, CrossFit has made an effort to communicate some of their, changes to the upcoming season or initiatives surrounding that earlier in the year. So there's some stuff coming out in October, November. There's kind of trickling out even over the holidays. And it's something that I often have to remind even the employers that I have at Bar Bend who aren't intimately involved with the CrossFit space. It's just one of many things that they're overseeing there, that it's not really a 9-to-5 job. Like, you don't know when those announcements are coming. Sometimes it's on a Friday night at 7 p.m. and that means that there's work to do that night or that weekend. Sometimes it's over holidays, and so taking normal time off relative to a lot of jobs or careers is not always possible. But the flip side is that sometimes there are, times during the day, week, or month that a lot of people are working and that there isn't necessarily as much to do. Mm-hmm. It's more and more, and I'm not sometimes I'm not the best planner where I just kind of go with the flow, and that can be helpful in ways that I just described when things pop up on the radar, maybe unforeseen. But my main objective right now is trying to plan leading into the Open the content that I do want to put out to try to hopefully direct people in the best way of what they should be looking for the 2023 season, whether it's the Open or even looking beyond that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Before we move on, I can't help but lean into the announcement that Sean Woodland gave you the other day when he was like, you got what I need. That was fantastic. I enjoyed every bit of that intro. And you say he's Brian Friend. It was so good the way he introed you and kind of snuck that in there. Just want to give a shout out to those guys. I ran into Tommy Marquez a couple times out there in Miami, and he's a phenomenal human. Just always involved, always pumping out some good stuff. So I wanted to give him a quick shout out. And he also just got married, which is super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do a lot more with Tommy and Sean before. I think before many people knew who I was, we had a segment called the Numbers Game with Brian Friend, but it was for their Patreons only.
Yeah.
There's actually probably some really good content back there that maybe we should bring out from the storage for some other stuff. But I haven't done an episode with him in a long time. I worked really closely with Sean at Wadapalooza, as I often do when I'm hired by the broadcast and he's working the event. Mm-hmm. And then they reached out and asked me to come on, and I said, yeah, of course I'd love to. So it was good to catch up with those guys after not doing that for quite some time.
Yeah, for sure. How's your shift been recently, kind of joining some of these broadcast opportunities? You're doing it a little bit with the Savan podcast, which is really cool, the way you guys are doing it and trying your best to play with varying camera angles. And it's obviously a work in progress, but it's very cool to see the evolutions there. And your role in kind of managing it all on the floor?
Yeah, I would say the last 3 competitions that I've worked at, have had very different roles, and all relative to the broadcast of the Zalos games. Of course, that was the one where we were basically trying something pretty new in terms of low budget, not a lot of fancy high tech equipment, just some phones and some people talking. Smaller field of athletes, so you can do that a little bit more easily. And obviously, it doesn't have the bells and whistles that Hamilton Road Productions provides in terms of all the fancy graphics and rep counters and the scrolling hats that show the lead changes as things are happening. But we were able to, I think, do a pretty good job. We got some good feedback on that. Then I went to Dubai, and I was one of the 2 commentators there for that competition. It's the biggest competition that I've ever been able to do that for. It was extremely exciting for me. I was, definitely a little nervous, but once you get into the flow of it, just like anything else, if you're well prepared, then it's more fun than anything else. And Derek was really easy to work with in that regard. I know that he has a lot of experience in TV. He knows that I have a lot of experience and knowledge about the athletes and the competition. So we just leaned on each other in those regards. And he was really generous in that way to let me do some things that even if I was hired in that role, I probably wouldn't do with a more formal broadcast at some of the other events. And then, as has been more of the normal for me this past season, when I've worked for Hamilton Roads, I don't know the technical term, but it's almost like a floor producer role where I'm on the floor with a headset to the truck, and I'm able to communicate certain things to them prior to the event, during the event, that hopefully help communicate and tell the story as good as possible for the large viewing audience, in this case, of Wodapalooza that was back home.
Yeah, totally. It's impressive to see how you're able to do that because, man, Wodapalooza has so much going on. And sometimes, dependent on where you're located, you have a limited lens on what you can really see as to the actuality of performance by the athletes. And so it's cool to see you kind of document that and run around and try your best to depict, like you said, a story and make it relatively relatable so the consumer can feel like they're in the present space as well.
Every competition has a unique challenge in that regard. The floor layouts are often different. The number of athletes competing, the length or width of the lanes, and of course, just by the nature of CrossFit itself, the workouts are always changing, the combinations of movements. And yeah, even as something as simple as a lifting event, you could go to 3 different competitions and they could execute that in 3 different ways. And for example, in Miami, they had 8 athletes lifting at one time. How are you supposed to make sure that you show and don't miss the biggest and best and most exciting lifts or failed attempts or athletes? Sometimes the biggest athletes aren't doing the biggest weights, but people still want to see them. So to try to manage all of that and get the entire team that it takes to do the broadcast on the same page is challenging. It's a work in progress. I feel very grateful that those guys have given me more and more chances to be a part of those teams. I think that we put out a really good product, but I also don't think it's anywhere near as good as it could be. Yeah. So, we'll have some meetings on the back end to try to. I've had a chance to watch a little bit while I was recovering at night during the Mayhem camps. I put on some events from Wodapalooza and just kind of see what it looks like for the people at home, because I was on the floor during that time. So I wasn't exactly sure if what we'd talked about ended up being the product that was put out. In some cases, I thought it was even better than I expected. And in other cases, I thought it wasn't as good as I thought it should have been. So I'll meet with those guys and have a debrief, as we always do, and try to improve if we can for the next one.
What I love about that is just that you're reflecting, you're almost watching film the way an athlete would, and a part of you is trying to get the spectator or the consumer experience, but then simultaneously I'm sure there's a little bit of critiquing your specific performance and how you can better interact with your teammates and the crew around you for a better totality experience for everybody else. Trident Coffee is sponsoring this episode of the Invictus Mindset Podcast. My guys over at Trident taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good and bad, and everything in between. At Trident, they're storytellers. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. They help create connections through symbology and storytelling that engage their customers on an emotional level, and this distinguishes them from other coffee brands. You can find Trident in Imperial Beach and in Coronado. They offer over 14 plus nitro cold brews along with dairy-free options. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from their keto bakery. All these options will allow you to support your health and fitness journey with Trident Coffee. They're more than just a coffee company. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Once again, that's tridentcoffee.com. Use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Take your coffee experience to the next level. Two important factors for us over at Invictus Mindset are true care and attention to detail. My friends over at RX Smart Gear have been bringing innovative fitness tools to the market since 2009. From their award-winning Evo speed ropes to their amazing gymnastics grips to their line of inflatable fitness equipment, they're constantly looking to problem solve within the fitness industry. They're always allowing us to have our gear work for us rather than against us. Hop on over to RX Smart Gear and use discount code Invictus Mindset to shop their latest cutting edge gear. Have your gear work with you and not against you.
That's super cool. And you also mentioned the lifting, man. I couldn't help but pull it up off your Instagram with Guy Mayeros putting up 395 pounds. What kind of went through your head when you saw that, followed by Tudor Magda at 386? These guys are starting to put up a ton of weight, man. Plus a 16-year-old man putting up 300 pounds, 335 pounds. What is going on, man? This is incredible.
Yeah, and I think there was a man in the 40 to 45 division that did 300 pounds. So across the board, some really impressive lifts. But in particular, Guy and Tudor are very young. I think Guy's 22 and Tudor's 19 or 20 still. And, as I wrote in that article, I expect that within the next year or two, depending on when they get another opportunity to do a heavy clean and jerk, that one or both of them will put up 400 pounds. I happened to sit next to Tudor's coach briefly during Ed Mao, briefly during that event. And he said that he believed that 405 was in the cards for him if everything went accordingly. And it really what it sparks in my mind is the choice that competitions make to limit the lifting attempts to 2 or 3 attempts, because everyone wants to see the big lifts. What would happen if instead of forcing them to do only 3 attempts on the clock like that, if at one of these upcoming competitions someone said, you got 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's see what you can do. Lift as many times as you want. When the 12, you have to have your last lift done by 12 minutes. And other than that, those are the only rules. Because I think if that was the case, that there's a high likelihood that one of those guys would have already hit 400 pounds.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you think that decreases the crescendo of experience where everybody's kind of built up? You see the clock counting down and the announcer goes 3, 2, 1, lift. Do you think that level of notoriety kind of boosts the energy and the adrenaline in that situation? Or do you think it would be better to just open it up and have a broad and inclusive time domain for people to go play?
So I kind of feel like there's only one way to find out. Everyone has been doing, everyone's been doing the former, which is, on these intervals you will lift. Sometimes it's one at a time. Sometimes it's the whole group at a time. And but we haven't seen in a really high level competition recently that more free for all format. I am pretty confident that if someone 8 minutes into a 12-minute window puts 405 on the bar, that the audience will take note of that. The cameras will all flick on, and there'll be a big cheer to try to get that weight overhead. Mm-hmm. But like I said, until someone does it, we won't necessarily know.
I like the little smirk on your face as you talk about that, because I'm seeing the imagery of it too. And as a competitor, out of the corner of your eye, if you're seeing somebody put up 405, you might try to go for 410. You might, gamify it a little bit. So it definitely makes the strategy pretty cool. And you talked about those guys being so young. And I was on the far side on the floor there at Wodapalooza, and I was able to watch
I think their team name was the Good Dudes of Dahlin, Hopper, and James Sprague. And their average age is 21.
I know.
Are you kidding me?
I know.
Just putting up a stellar performance. What was it? 50 dumbbell bench press. They did in a world record of 99 seconds. That's fantastic. What'd you write? The world's fastest bro sesh?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, Jason Hopper is a major contributor there with the football background. He's been benching since he could probably walk, and obviously, had a chance to play at some degree at a high level in college. So he was certainly looking forward to that. I was equally impressed with Kerry Pierce and Alex Kazan on the dumbbell bench, and they told me beforehand, they're like, "Don't blink." So they also were very, very fast.
Alex, I've chatted with her a few times, and we've seen some of the cool things that she's done. She's amazing at legless rope climbs, which is what got her to the games last year at Granite Games, that final workout. Her upper body's so strong.
Yeah, it's one of the things from last season that I think I'm most sad about is that CrossFit didn't publish the individual lifts from the other total that took place during semifinals. I wish that I could go and click on that and not just see that someone did 950 pounds, but see the breakdown of clean squat and overheads, or clean bench and overhead squat. I'm sure that data is out there somewhere, and I'm pretty confident that Alex Kazan had one of, if not the heaviest bench press during that.
What did she put up? Like
a lot more than me.
Yeah.
I don't know, 230 or something around there.
Yeah, that's quite impressive, man. Well, jumping back into kind of the CrossFit landscape, before we talk about the overall ranking system, which is very, very cool, what are your thoughts on the gentle shifts in CrossFit leadership? And, we saw Gary Gaines kind of step away. There's some, from the outside looking in, it seems like there's a little bit of volatility and shaking at the top, which, I definitely think there's some whispers and some echoes in the background of like, is this sport strong enough to stick around? We're seeing the sponsors be there, Tier and Noble making big pushes, along with LSKD and a few other brands, Strike Movement being in the conversation as well. But what's going on with CrossFit leadership? And, is it strong enough to kind of make it through what seems to be a little bit of a storm?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who've had a chance to either be a part of the entire history of the sport or at least have some kind of working understanding of the different stages that it's gone through, the time period from basically 2012 to 18 seemed to be a very, very solid part of our history. Whereas since 2018, there's been a lot of change, volatility, and unpredictability. I think if we want to get back to that, some of the most critical things we should be pursuing are consistency. And the consistency during that time was, there were small changes to the season, but it was relatively known. You had the Open, you had regionals, you had the games. The process was fairly clear. They introduced the Masters or age group divisions, and the process again was pretty clear. You had the Open, the online qualifier, and the CrossFit Games. 3-step season. Everyone knew where to look and how that worked. Was it the best system? I don't know, but it was predictable. It was simple and it was easy to follow. In the same vein, you had very consistent presence at the top. There was Greg Glassman overseeing all of CrossFit. There was Dave Castro overseeing the CrossFit Games. Adrian Bosman was the head judge. Sean Woodland was the lead commentator. Like the most visible roles were very consistent. Sevan was doing the behind the scenes. Everyone knew who was doing what, where, when, and how they could digest that information because all the media was coming out of CrossFit. Right now, it feels like someone's just spinning a wheel in the dark, and then every season we're like, oh, these 5 things are going to change. They're going to change at a random time and random interval. We might be removing one executive here, changing this part of the season here. The media is controlled by CrossFit. Now it's not. This part of the season is sponsored by the title sponsor. This one's not. And there's just it's really, really difficult even for those of us that are ingrained in this sport to keep track of everything, let alone trying to bring anyone new into the fold. So I think if we want to continue to push forward, some amount of consistency needs to be a priority and a focus, and that starts with CrossFit itself, the CrossFit Games team, if we're talking about the sport, and the CrossFit executive or leadership team, if we're talking about the brand and the methodology side of things.
So interesting that you say that. That's such a good point, and very well said, Brian.
when you look at just that term consistency, time and time again, it works. Whether that's training, whether that's parenting, whether that's nutrition, mindset, routine, pumping out content consistently, that term seems to always be there. We know it, but it's got like the best hiding spot in the sense that it's right in front of all of our faces. And it seems to be a very challenging thing to apply for sure as far as an actionable. And once again, we're seeing the season change just a little bit. And we've got the Open, we've got quarterfinals, we've got semifinals, and then we've got the games. And within that, they've released a worldwide ranking system based on the performances within the last 2 years. What are your thoughts on this ranking system, and then how does it apply to the landscape of the season, especially in that pivotal semifinals spot?
Well, as of the time we're recording this, all of the details surrounding the worldwide ranking system are still unknown. There are certain things that CrossFit has revealed in the months at the end of 2022, and I believe that by the conclusion of January 2023, which means 2.5 weeks or slightly more before the season starts with the Open, we'll have more of the full picture, or hopefully the full picture of what that will look like. At this point, what we know is that basically the semifinals that were removed from last year, which include the last chance qualifier, 2 semifinals from North America, and 1 semifinal from Europe, all of those spots are a free-for-all. They're up for grabs right now. The remaining semifinals that are all there have a minimum number guaranteed, and then, as you mentioned, based on a system that will factor in performances from the last 2 years, I believe additionally factor in performances from this year's Open and quarterfinals, that shortly after quarterfinals, hopefully shortly after quarterfinals, and well before semifinals, meaning I would hope for like 2 months time frame, or maybe just under, that we'll know exactly how many spots every semifinal will have. They will redistribute those 17 spots for the men and 17 spots for the women, not necessarily evenly. So it's possible that a specific continent, or I guess semifinal, we'll say a specific semifinal could earn more spots on the female side than the male side, and vice versa in different regions of the world. This is getting closer to what I have always hoped for, but is still, I think, not the best system that we could have. And when I say closer to what I've always hoped for, is CrossFit historically has pumped out into the world that they are going to, in pursuit of finding and crowning the fittest man and fittest woman on earth. And additionally, and especially we saw this highlighted by Dave Castro himself in 2019, that their priority is not to rank the rest of the athletes at the games 2 through 40 and say that's the 2nd, 10th, 20th, and 40th fittest man or woman on earth. They are looking for, and have been looking for, the fittest. I want to see the fittest field of 40, and I want to know after the conclusion of the test where they rank 1 through 40. Meaning that I want everyone who makes the games to do all the events, and I want every event to be weighted equally. So I don't want to see changes in scoring systems or size of field at the games, and I would love to see, if you want to give a minimum of 1 spot to every continent or semifinal, I can support that. Beyond that, I feel like it should be earned, and that the remaining spots should be representative as close as we can get to the fittest 40 men and women on earth, competing not just for the title of the fittest, but to rank themselves amongst themselves to see who is the best, next best, and etc. that year in our sport.
I like that. I think it's very cool to know that it's not just the one, but where does everybody else fall? And knowing that one that does get crowned fittest on earth beat the people that were very, very close to being the fittest on earth. It makes for the competition to be a little bit more streamlined and more fun for the spectators. With the ranking system, could you foresee like CrossFit fantasy teams or something like that, where now sports betting kind of gets involved, very similar to some of the other sports?
Definitely. I think that this is along the lines of the conversation with consistency that we were having. If you establish a ranking system, it has to start somewhere. And so I actually am not the biggest fan of leaning on the last 2 years of performance as any part of this ranking system, because the athletes were competing in that season not knowing that their performances would affect not just their chances, but their region or semifinal or continent's chances to have more spots at the games. And I've given some specific examples about this that are very obvious. I think Travis Mayer is probably the most obvious one. He was the winner of quarterfinals in North America one year, and he was like 112th the next year. There's other guys like Lazar Jukic that were really open about the fact that in 2022, having learned what the 2021 season was like, didn't invest very heavily in the Open or quarterfinals, and therefore his relative performances in those were a lot worse than they were the year before. And I think that's true for many athletes. There are other athletes who have maybe they know that they can't win the games or maybe even make the games, and so they want to have a really impressive mark on their resume. So you look at a guy like Reggie Fossa, who won he won the European quarterfinals one year, and then he was 14th or so in his semifinal that same season. So those performances from 2021 and 2022 in the Open and quarterfinals especially, if they're going to be factored at all, I hope they are very, very small in terms of the weighting system, because the athletes weren't competing with the mindset of this is going to affect my chances or maybe my friends or other competitors in my part of the world's chances to get to the CrossFit Games. If we're just projecting forward to what you were asking, once we have 1 or 2 seasons under our belt of hopefully an understandable and consistent ranking system, then we're starting to get somewhere in terms of those conversations. Then we can say, yeah, last year, these were the top ranked athletes, 1 through whatever, and we know that based on this ranking system that's being applied to our sport. Just like we can look at an athlete like Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic in tennis, or Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson in golf, and say, yep, they were ranked number 1 for 333 weeks in their career, including a streak of 205 consecutive, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas right now in CrossFit, we can really only say that about the CrossFit Games champions.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I also think that this will lead to more job opportunities. I know, speaking specifically from basketball, there's a lot of scouts, and they're not just looking at overall rankings, but they're analyzing the specific skill of each athlete, how they apply it, the consistency of that skill application, and then assigning maybe some sort of T-chart of strengths and weaknesses, which then pumps out some sort of ranking. At least from my gentle foresight, I feel like inevitably we're going to start seeing experts like yourself potentially playing that role. I mean, everybody loves to see the rankings that you put out on your Instagram based on things like previously Wodapalooza. And so what are your thoughts? Like, how do you specifically assign tangible values to rank these athletes? Is it based on the outcome of performance? Is it based on load lifted, work capacity, gymnastic skill? Like, there's so many different variables to apply.
That is true. and the conversations I've had with others who've done that is why kind of at the end of the day, in addition to all of those things, there is also just the intangible nature of sports that some people just show up on game day and some don't.
100%. I love that you said that. It's a factor that can't necessarily be quantitative, but you observe it like on the floor, you're like, that person's a killer.
Yeah, and there are athletes that you'll go to train with them and you'll say, yeah, they're good, but come on, like there's no way. And then you go and see them in a competition and it's different. And for anyone who's played competitive sports, you most likely have had a teammate or a friend that's like that. Growing up, I was the king of practice. I mean, I always won practice, and I was the fittest guy, and I was the best teammate to have in practice. My best friend was the total opposite. It was frustrating to have him on your team in practice, but when it came time to play the game, there was no one you wanted on the field more.
The gamer.
He was a gamer. He was a goal scorer. He was a killer. He wasn't lazy in practice, but he just, for whatever reason, he got up for the games. And for someone like me, who was a creator and facilitator in soccer, it was great to have him but I didn't want him on my team in practice. And there are athletes like this in CrossFit, where you can go train with them or watch them train or talk to people who train with them, and they're like, yeah, I'm beating that guy more often than he's beating me in training. But every time I go to a competition with him, I can't even come close.
You know who comes to mind from a historical reference? He no longer competes? Rasmus.
Rasmus Anderson.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite people to, hang around because same thing in training. Some days he brought it, other days, he was just kind of going through the motions or practicing a certain skill development. But man, on game day, that dude could go.
Yeah, and I mean, you can even look at someone, and I know that there were some unfortunate circumstances this year for him in the offseason, but, Lazar Djukic had a pretty rough offseason. But he's finished top 10 in the games the past 2 years. He won a semifinal last year. Like, when it matters most, he's shown that he can show up and get the job done. And there are plenty of other athletes like that. Sometimes the offseason competitions are misleading in that regard. You can look at the Dubai leaderboard. Before the Open comes out this year, I'll put out a list of top 100 male and female athletes going into this season. And there'll be times where you'll look at the list and you'll say, that's ridiculous. How can you have that person 20 spots higher than someone else when they lost to them at Wadapalooza or at Dubai or at Rogue? And it's because I'm not weighing those competitions as the most critical factor. What I'm looking at is the totality of their career. I mean, there are athletes that you might say have caught up to and surpassed someone like a BKG or Cole Sager or Noah Olsen or Travis Mayer. But when push comes to shove at the games, they're still beating all those guys that are 20, 22, 24, 26 years old. Why? Because they're leaning on experience. They're leaning on the veteran savvy that inevitably comes with having a decade of doing this. And they understand how to manage the entire season or year of training so that they can be at the best when it matters most. And that's what makes them one of the greats.
That's a great
There
point.
are others that are figuring that out. And there are others that maybe haven't shown that yet that I believe will eventually show that. And others that will never figure it out, even though they have all of the talent and skills in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Something that I noticed quite a bit from some of the younger athletes that maybe aren't necessarily a part of some of the veteran training camps to get and absorb some of that experience is the younger athletes, they can really do the thing. They can lift really well, their gymnastics, their work capacity, it's all phenomenal. The two major holes that I see are in transitions. They transition relatively slow, and also within recovery. They think they can get away with certain things, and there's something around this social media age of performing really well when the cameras are on or when you're being watched or validated for the choice. But then behind the scenes, who are you when nobody's watching? And inevitably, those small choices to make, stay up a little bit later, to not do that additional recovery, to not see that body worker, to make that food choice instead of that food choice. Guys that you just mentioned, like BKG, Noah Olsen, Travis Mayer, they've done those things consistently over time, and it's showed within their track record that they weren't just a one-hit wonder once upon a time that did a cool thing. The longevity really matters, and it shows as a product of their choices.
100%. And this year in particular, I have spent more time with athletes outside of competition, whether it's talking to them on podcasts, getting to interact with them during check-ins, maybe hang around a competition an extra day. This past week, especially, I got the chance to be around about 20 or 30 games athletes down in Cookeville, Tennessee, and then see a few others at CrossFit East Nashville on my way home. And I'm learning more and more about that process and what goes into the day-to-day, and also the mental component of being an elite athlete in this sport that is definitely a little bit different. There's certainly some carryovers to other sports, but there are elements of it that I think are also very different. If you want to be amongst the best in this sport, and again, when you're asking me about how do I evaluate talent or make projections and predictions, I feel like I'm starting now to be able to have a little bit more understanding on that side of what might make the difference for a certain competitor compared to another, over the course of a 2, 3, or 4 day competition.
Yeah. It is an interesting sport for sure. I know in basketball and football, a lot of these athletes are so talented, but they love to go out. There is a party lifestyle associated on the outskirts of their competition. But the sport of CrossFit seems to be so rigid that if your food, your sleep, your mobility, your flexibility, your mindset, there's so many different intangibles because of the challenging tests that inevitably come up that sometimes are gently randomized, sometimes are very calculated, that it almost seems that back in the day, you could work a couple jobs and then train a couple times a day and figure it out. This episode is brought to you by HVMN, Health via Modern Nutrition. They launched the world's first ketone drink in 2017, and then in 2022 launched the version 2 of their exogenous ketone product line called Ketone IQ. I found that incorporating ketones into my morning routine increased my daily focus and energy. The beauty of this product is that you can stack it. It doesn't even have to replace your morning routine. My morning routine looks like taking the dog on a walk, hitting my daily shot of Ketone IQ, hopping in the cold plunge, and then finishing it off with a nice Trident coffee while I soak up some morning sunlight. Try out some ketones for yourself by using the code Invictus for 20% off Ketone IQ. Ketones are a super efficient fuel for your brain that leaves you feeling energized and clear-headed. Give it a shot. I promise you won't regret it. Once again, use code Invictus for 20% off Ketone IQ.
But it almost seems like now you have to almost make CrossFit your sole focus, where it's typically, as you mentioned, 2 sessions a day, a skill, gymnastics, maybe functional bodybuilding, followed by, a very CrossFit heavy or interval style session. And then in addition to that, sneaking in, like I said, the food, the recovery, the mobility, the body work. It's a full-time job, and you almost have to be blinders on and gently selfish in that arena in order to compete with the top 10 or 20 in the world.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's very difficult to track when you're trying to keep in account hundreds of athletes around the world. So, for example, there's a female who I first thought could be great in this sport 4 years ago. Her name's Karen Frey, or Karen Freyova. And this year at semifinals, she finally had a performance on a stage that mattered, that had a spotlight on it, that earned her a spot at the CrossFit Games, where I thought more people got a chance to see what I saw in her a few years ago in terms of potential. Well, it comes to find out she doesn't speak English great, but she can communicate. I had a conversation with her after she qualified that day, and she said, well, yes, I finished my schooling, so I've been able to focus more on this. And it's not that she didn't have all those tools. It's that there was another thing that was taking up a lot of her time and focus that she was able to set aside for a season. I think she's going to do the same this season. And we saw her make the games. And we know that, going to the cross, she'd made the games before, by the way, but she had not necessarily had a chance to see the games all the way through because of some of the formats that we had over the last couple of years. This time we got to see her do a complete CrossFit Games. I think that she came short of her potential still, but a lot of people learn a great deal in the year 1 of the CrossFit Games. And then we saw her basically annihilate the competition in Dubai. And I feel that in addition to having less distraction, more time, already a focused mindset, and now some confidence coming into this season, that's an athlete who I've got my eye on that has a legitimate chance to take yet another step forward this year.
Yeah.
And so you can just imagine if that's one athlete that I am talking about. And now to keep in mind all of the other 1 to 200 who may be relevant in this competition season and try to learn some way or another if something like that is happening in their life, where they either have more or less distractions than they did in the previous year or two, and how that might affect their performance this time around.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the parents that do it, the moms, the dads, it's impressive. Got to give those guys a shout out for sure.
Yeah, and it feels like there are more and more of those. A lot of time, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I'm thinking, man, this is feeling like a much greater percentage of games athletes are now also moms and dads.
Yeah, for sure. Shout outs to their significant others for sure, for being incredibly supportive in this endeavor.
I think when you have kids, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's another level altogether. But even in terms of those that don't, when you do have someone who is completely supportive of what you're doing in this sport, it goes a long way towards your success. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that the greatest athletes we've ever seen have solid relationships and therefore partners in their relationships, like a Shane Orr, Sammy Moniz, Hillary Froning, that have been there providing the support that they need along the way so that they can continue to focus and take the time that's necessary to be great in this sport. time after time, or year after year, like those athletes have been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned Shane. That's been a big topic, right? Shane and Tia are pregnant, and they're expecting, and incredibly excited for those guys, sending all the love and positive vibes as they navigate a new chapter and a new experience. But Brian, you and I both know that changes the competition. That changes the conversation on the women's side. What were some of the things that were your immediate thoughts when that news came to the forefront?
Well, first of all, I actually got to see Shane in Miami, and I had the best conversation I've ever had with him. And then yesterday, coming back from Cookeville, heading to Nashville, Patrick Clark and I stopped by CrossFit Eats in Nashville just to see if anyone would be there, and Tia was there.
Oh, cool.
So I had also the best conversation that I've ever had with her. I make it a priority to not interact with athletes if I don't need to at competitions, because they're so focused on the job at hand. So has been a very refreshing the last 2 weeks to get to talk to both of them separately, and I feel a tremendous amount of happiness for them. And yes, like you said, when you have someone who's the 6-time champion and suddenly she's not in the equation for the upcoming season, there is a massive void at the top of the sport and a massive opportunity for, say, half a dozen athletes to make a career-changing performance this year at the CrossFit Games. Mm-hmm. If you win the CrossFit Games, that is monumental. My initial instinct is that there are 2 women that have a much greater chance to do that than any others, and those are Mallory O'Brien and
O'Brien and Laura Horvath.
Those are the 2.
Danielle Brandon in the conversation, maybe?
So, like I said, I think there are about a half dozen women that have a chance to make a major career move this year, and that would be because when the top spot of the podium opens up, that means that the bottom spot of the podium also opens up. So everyone who was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 last year, I think is looking at this as maybe their best chance yet to make the podium. And names that come to mind, of course, are Danielle Brandon. She was 1 spot away last year. Haley Adams, who's been in the top 10 consistently since making it, but has yet to get on the podium. Brooke Wells, who's had some of her best performances in the past years. She's actually, she's made 8 consecutive CrossFit Games. She's had a couple top 5 finishes, yet to make the podium. Gabriella Magawa has been impressive in the last couple of seasons. And then there's this wild card out there of Cara Webb and Annie Thorsdottir. Because if Annie comes back into the competitive individual field, well, she made the podium the last time she did it. She looked pretty good at Rogue this year, so she's certainly still in the mix. And Cara Webb, of all of the athletes on the women's side, may be the most motivated by Tia not being in this season, because she was the queen of Oceania or Australia before Tia came along. She's been as close as anyone who's never won the CrossFit Games to winning it on multiple occasions. And even though I don't think that she can win it this year, because some of these younger women have just gotten to be next level, I do think that she can improve upon her 7th place finish last year if she wants to. So that's, a pretty good list of women who may have a really good opportunity this year to do something special.
Yeah. You mentioned Haley Adams. She's been a little bit of a distant wild card recently, maybe I'll say, in the sense that she's gently stepped a little bit away from social media, really buckled down on her strength development. From the sound of things and listening to Rich speak, she's kind of got a team involved now where different people are playing different roles to kind of maybe help gap fill some of the challenges or voids that she's felt in the past. The capacity's there. We talked about competitive instinct and that killer instinct as being a gamer. She's definitely got that. I've trained with her on numerous occasions, and she does not back down. She's super fun. She's super aggressive, and she's a go-getter. I've been a big fan for a very long time. Does she have it in her to put on that level of mass and strength and the mindset component to fully dedicate to that weakness that's been ever present, and despite the weakness has still been in the conversation in the top 10 year after year after year after year?
Yeah, I have seen many of the same things you described from Haley in the personal interactions I've had with her and watching her compete throughout her career. And the thing is, as young as she is, she's been doing this with a high degree of intensity for a long time.
Yeah.
And we don't know yet how sustainable that is over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. And if you're being just very pragmatic from what we've seen recently, which is women becoming elite at 16, 17, 18 years old, and also women who have remained elite at 33, 34, 35 years old, that's a long period of time that there's the potential for women especially to be great in the sport. But can anyone actually do it? Can you actually do all the things we've been talking about in terms of lifestyle choices, having a support system, having a lack of distractions, and enough financial freedom to pursue this sport at the highest level for all that time? And I think what some young athletes who started doing CrossFit, competed as a teenagers, did very well there, and are now transitioning and finding some success in the individual field, but kind of seem to be bumping up against a ceiling, are starting to think about what is realistic for me year to year, or maybe over the course of a few years, if I want to break through that ceiling, and what are the decisions that I have to make now that are maybe different than what I've made in the past to be able to do that. And I would echo what you said, especially after spending a little bit of time with Rich this past week, is that Haley seems to have made that realization and that decision that I'm going to change a couple things, because I know that I'm good enough to be here, but I want to be on the podium. I want to take that next step. And it's kind of that age old saying, like, if you keep doing the same things over and over to get the same results, what does that make you? Well, she's sick of doing that. So she wants to make some changes in her life, in her off season, and see how that applies to, the most important competitions in season. When it comes to strength specifically, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen in 1 year. I think that if she can apply that discipline of whatever these new decisions she's making in her lifestyle over the course of 3 years, that by the time the 2025 games comes around, it might happen before then, but at least by that time, that we will see the next version of Haley Adams that will be even more formidable than what we've already seen from her.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always be what you've always been. And she's making that adjustment. And what's always so interesting to see within the polarizing sport of CrossFit, when you think of like capacity and conditioning and strength, and obviously intermixed are the skills, is if you lean so heavily on the weakness and try to bring that up, does the strength stay the same? And when I say strength, I don't mean actual strength, but her strength as an athlete in the conditioning, in the running, which is typically where she makes her moves a little bit. It was very cool last year at the games that run before those heavy jerks was actually a separate score. I think that helped her a lot. And it's interesting just to see that dosage. If she's putting more time, energy, and attention into the dosage of this over here, does that stay at a high enough level to still die for points, as Justin Medeiros likes to say?
Well, that particular event, shuttle to overhead A and shuttle to overhead B, is a good example of what you're talking about, because and this is something that Adrian Bosman may learn from this workout next year, and he may avoid something like this. But what we saw was, I have a better example on the men's side than the women's in my mind, but there was Uldis Upanex who won the running portion, and I think he might have done 3 total or less shoulder to overheads, and he got 4 points or something in that workout. So he had 104 total points across the 2 scored events. I think Brent Fikowski got like an 18th and a 26th. So he's kind of middle and middle, and that yielded somewhere around 80 points. So it was far better. I mean, Brent would have been better just selling out on the run and ignoring the lifting altogether. He would have got more points just by doing that. And I don't necessarily think that's what we're pursuing, is being able to game a workout that way, to just mail in one part and take the points on the other side. That's why I think that Adrian may try to avoid a situation like that next time. But on the more macro level, it still applies, is can you improve on the thing that you're, behind your peers on without giving away the thing that you're ahead of them on? And there are many athletes that I think about this with regards to, 2 in particular, who are also at Mayhem right now, is Roman Krennikov, the best in the world on machines. And he's basically lost 3 competitions this year because he can't keep up with the rest of the guys on ring muscle ups. His 3 worst events finishes at each of those competitions, the Games, Rogue, and Wadapalooza, were on the ring muscle-up event. And if not for that poor performance relative to his other performances, he may have won all 3 of those this year. And then you have Guy Maieros. He basically took the whole offseason and did nothing, whereas what I've been told now, I mean, very little compared to what you'd expect of one of the top 10 men in the world, and he still clean and jerked 395 pounds. But he also looked just as miserable running during the air runner as he did during the Capitol at the Games. Well, now I know that he's got a major focus on running this offseason. I know that, Roman's made a change in his coaching team when the focus is going to be to bring up that level of gymnastics. And so in 3 instances of those 3 athletes, Haley, Guy, and Roman, we'll be able to see maybe this year if they've been able to move the needle on those and if it affects their performance on the things that they're world class in.
Yeah, I am very excited to see the outcome of their hard work. They're definitely putting it in. I have a little bit of a controversial, fun question for you. And it stems a little bit from Guy. I see it from countless other athletes as well, but specifically to how awesome it looks to the human eye lifting big weights and doing complexities like ring muscle ups or certain gymnastics tricks. It elicits for a really cool reel. It looks really cool for the validation and the attention on social. This episode is brought to you by Mush. My friends over at Mush created an incredibly cool product of ready-to-eat overnight oats. And for those of you that listen to the podcast often, you know simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And Mush has done just that, as their products have no more than 7 clean ingredients that are dairy-free, gluten-free, with no added sugar. Mush started right here at Invictus, as they had a vision to create convenient, healthy, and clean nutrition. And this landed them on Shark Tank, where the famous Mark Cuban invested in them. Now they're found in retailers all over the country, including Costco, Sprouts, Target, and Whole Foods. Check out my friends over at www.eatmush.com. At what point are these athletes subtly pursuing the growth and development of their status as influencers to greatly monetize their careers in comparison to, I'm actually trying to get on the podium? Like, where is the dance, right? We definitely know that it exists. It's not something that's talked about often, but you and I know it's there. And it's something that I do notice from some of these athletes where their time, energy, and attention, and when they're in competitions, you see like red in their eyes during certain events. And then other events, they're like, doesn't really look that cool to do some sandbag cleans and a 5K run.
I think in both the men's and women's divisions, there's some very clear and relatable examples for this. We'll start with the men since you brought up Guy, but I think you can look at Guy compared to Justin Medeiros, the 2-time champ. And if you just were to just zoom out from the performance or the final product of what those two have produced in terms of competition, and all you wanted to look at was the most viewed videos of Justin Medeiros and the most viewed videos of Guy Maieros from the last 2 years, Guy is probably killing him by a landslide when you factor in the just alone the lifting events he's won. Not to mention a couple of the others that he's done really well on, because he's got the record of the barbell complex. He's got a couple iconic moments at the CrossFit Games, now at Wadapalooza, and he's just putting this world-class display into the thing that is extremely catchy and popular. Whereas Justin Medeiros has done the thing that everyone dreams of doing, which is winning the CrossFit Games, not once, but twice. But what he's kind of become known for is doing it by mostly just staying under the radar and finishing 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th on everything. So he doesn't have these highlight moments, even that a Matt Fraser had. He also was winning some very spectacle and spectacular competitions at the CrossFit Games or individual workouts. On the women's side, and actually my friend Jason, CF Media over in Europe, wrote an article and did a video about this. I think he did a video, maybe not the article, last June. I remember talking to him while I was down in Dallas at an event Chase Ingram was running. And he wrote about Danny Spiegel. And that Danny Spiegel, and I'm going to compare her here to Laura Horvath, Danny Spiegel compared to Laura Horvath is also completely obliterating her in terms of social media presence with the impressive feats that she's done in competition. I mean, I remember even back to a few years ago at Wadapalooza where she did these snatches and handstand walks over the ramp, and it was one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen from a competitor in CrossFit. Very complex, heavy combination. She made it look effortless and just obliterated the field, and all the cameras knew she was going to do it. And there's great footage and memories of that. And then the sandbag lift, and then so on and so forth when these perfect events show up for her. And she's leveraged those into great opportunities with marketing, with endorsements, with sponsorships, and taking advantage of a unique and very impressive physique that she has as well. And she's had a very successful career despite not doing that great at the CrossFit Games. She was 13th in the 2020 version, which was online. No one watched anything really from that. And then she was 17th this past year, which is her next best performance. So she is actually getting better. And she's actually getting better at the things that are kind of boring, but also the worst things. You know, she's had some much more respectable finishes on longer events, and in particular with longer running in them this past year at semifinals, at the games, and also at Wodapalooza. But in the meantime, you have Laura Horvath, who's winning semifinals, who's podiuming at the games, who's winning the Rogue Invitational, who's winning the team version of Wodapalooza. But she's not having these highlight spectacle moments that a Guy and a Danny are having, despite having the success that Danny and Guy might want to have in terms of competition. So it's a great question, and I think that it's, in one regard, it's good, because this means that only one person can win, and only 3 people can podium, but there are more than that can find success within the entire ecosystem of the sport. And in the case of Danny Spiegel in particular, I think the fact that she's been able to do that, which has brought some sense of financial security to her, gives her more longevity, which means she has more time to work on those things that take some time for her to build up, running aerobic capacity and figuring out how to manage a very different body type that doesn't really lend itself to that. But she's shown that she's found a way to improve, and as a result is also improving as an athlete. And I think that that's the wall that a lot of people run into. I can only do this for so much time without making money. And if there are more avenues to make money, that means that there's more time for more athletes to invest in what it might take for them to become the greatest version of themselves on the competition floor.
Yeah, that's a great way you painted that picture, so people could kind of gently understand the decisions and, I mean, the role that the financial contribution plays to maximizing your potential as an athlete. There's a lot that goes into it for sure. You wrote an article gently around some of the dark horses that had awesome performances at Wodapalooza. You can gently chat a little bit about them, but I'm also curious. Emma Carey came out firing, and there's a few other people that maybe were a little away from the CrossFit space, managing injuries or life, and she's coming back. And she's coming back with a vengeance. She seems very hungry. And, you know, what are your thoughts on some of the up-and-comers that may present themselves in the narrative this upcoming year?
Well, we will, either Patrick or I will write an article for Barbend leading into the season that kind of just catalogs all of the women that fall into this category for this year. But there's about 10 or 12 of them who weren't at the CrossFit Games last year for one reason or another. In some cases, they're names like Katrin Davidsdottir, Sarah Sigmundsdottir, and Jamie Simmons, who tried and came up just barely short. In other instances, there's athletes like Bethany Shadburn, Emma Tall, and Emma Carey, who had an injury that prevented them from either starting or finishing the season prior to the CrossFit Games. And in a rare instance, you have someone like Emily Rolfe, who showed up to the CrossFit Games but had to pull out after one event. All of the women that I mentioned, and probably a few others as well, like Annika Greer or Manyo Nangonis, who had a faux pas during the quarterfinals that prevented them from moving on, have a potential to be somewhere in that 10 to 30 range at the games. I would say of all the athletes I listed, they could all find themselves in that range. And when we think back to what I said earlier, where I want to see the 40 best at the games, if those 10 athletes are there, which 10 athletes are not there? And you start to look at some of these others that are in that category, because we know that there's a certain amount allotted to the other continents around the world, and that some of those athletes like Sungyoung Choi, for example, is starting to show that she can hang with some of the best in the world. But we've consistently seen that the women from South America, Africa, and then everyone else from Asia besides Sungyoung Choi have yet to really be able to hang at the top. So if you want to, of those women, I'm not sure who's the most dangerous to watch. But when I think about Emma Carey in particular and what we saw her do at Wodapalooza, She had one really bad event. It was with the D ball, and she basically just said, I was so sweaty and it was so slippery that I couldn't pick it up. It didn't have anything to do necessarily with my fitness. However, she went and bought a D ball. So she lives in Florida and there's plenty of humidity there. So maybe she'll figure that out. And she's young, things like that happen in competition. And you see someone like Brent Fikowski, who found some medical sleeves and was wearing them on his arms during that event to make sure that wouldn't happen. And we know that he's always kind of finding these little ways to maximize his potential, even when it comes to stuff that has nothing to do with fitness, but just setting himself up to be able to display his fitness better than others.
That's the experience thing we talked about before, though, that we saw firsthand. It's a great example.
Yeah. So but even if Emma Carey had a clean run on that event, I don't think she would have beaten Paige Powers and Danny Spiegel. But I think she would have been close. And also, if Emily Rolfe hadn't torn her calf, then she would have been up there in the mix for the podium. And right behind that, you had Sydney McAlishan. So all games athletes, also women who have top 20 potential at the games. And Emma Carey, who does have a 14th place finish in her games appearance 2 years ago, I think is still relevant in that conversation as having the potential to at least be somewhere in the 10 to 20 range at the CrossFit Games this year.
Yeah, man. The individual side of things is shooken up a little bit with Tia stepping away, and I can't help but lean into the team side of things now, Brian. Obviously, Rich, stepping away from competition, still heavily involved with the Mayhem community, but the team side of things is definitely going to be interesting, especially since now you just have to perform the open workouts at the affiliate. So we may see some gentle shuffling. We may see the attempt for some super teams out there. What are your thoughts on the whole team landscape?
Yeah, I mean, being down in Mayhem, you see the affiliate cup there, and you just look at the one side of it, and it's Mayhem, 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 Wasatch, Mayhem, Mayhem, Mayhem. And there's, like you said, in the women's side, there's a void at the top because Rich has been the mainstay and the constant at the top of the podium for many years now. And he's been able to shuffle in a variety of different athletes and still have that same result. Since CrossFit made those announcements last fall, I know that there have been many conversations globally about that thing that you just asked. And I have, as I try to do, attempted to kind of have a pulse on what are some of the best teams that might be upcoming are. But even this morning, as soon as this morning, there's news that's coming in regularly about shifting landscape of some of these teams. 3 weeks from now, the CrossFit Games Open will begin, and we'll have answers to a lot of those questions. As it stands right now, with what I know, I do think the other two podium teams from last year, being CrossFit Oslo and CrossFit Invictus, if what they have said is true, which is that they are running it back, are as good a contenders as anyone to win the CrossFit Games in 2023 in the team division. If Andrea Nisler and Taylor Williamson pursue a team, I would probably put them in the mix as being a great team as well. I know that Angelo DiCicco is taking over kind of the mantle in Mayhem to assemble a team there that could potentially be very good. He was very quietly 5th place last year with Luke Parker, Alexis Johnson, and Sasha Nieves, and they finished 5th, which is great. The top team is out, and so they can move up potentially a little bit as well. And outside of that, most of the teams that I've heard about, I feel like I just have to be a holding pattern and wait to see what actually manifests when the season begins.
Yeah, that's a good depiction for sure. Angelo DiCicco is definitely trying his best to fill that Mayhem role. I'm excited to see what they're able to put together. What's going on with Sam Cormier? Is he looking to go team, looking to go individual? I know he's nursing that bicep injury from Wadapalooza. Who do you think is going to team up with Angelo DiCicco?
Oh, well, Sam DeMeester and Zoe Jones from Michigan have moved on to CrossFit Mayhem and will be on the team with Angelo. And then they're looking to fill in the last female. And I know that they've been having some conversations and are pretty close to wrapping that up. But I'll let them, make that announcement when everything is done and delivered on their end. And Sam Cormier, I was bummed not to get to see him compete in the off season this year. I was looking forward to him at least competing in Wadapalooza because the way that the competition was structured, even in the team division, you could definitely get some insights into where he's at individually. They had some, individual components or two-person team components of those workouts, but unfortunately hurt himself in the first event and never really got to see that from him. He's going to go individual. He's not going to be on a team this year. I'm just hoping that he's healthy. And if he is healthy, I think he is probably amongst the 20 fittest men on earth.
Wow. Well, I can't help now, man. I got to talk about Invictus. That's our squad over here. And
Yeah.
I think in the off season, I think Jorge did an amazing job out at Rogue. We saw him kind of go head to head with Justin Medeiros on that rope climb event, which was super cool. We saw Brittany do very well this last weekend at Wadapalooza. We saw Devin Kim do incredible at Zalos Games. And, Josh is always poking you and spitballing with you a little bit on the gram. What are your thoughts on the four of them running it back, what they've learned, where they can go, and the noise that they can potentially make in the team competition?
Yeah, I definitely underestimated them last year relative to their performance, as I've been reminded several times. but they I gave them all the credit. Like they put the work together and then they put together a performance that to me is reflective of a team.
Yeah.
And when I watch them compete, they all have each other's back. They communicate really well. The nonverbal communication is there. And even if they are frustrated with whatever's happening on the field of play, it rarely is something that prohibits them from finishing out the workout. And they just said they'll deal with it after the fact. I do think that individually, they're all still improving. I think it was good for them this offseason to kind of pursue some individual endeavors because it gives them a different kind of feedback in terms of what to work on to improve themselves individually and therefore make them a stronger component or piece of that team. And this past week, I got to spend, some very intimate and close time in the training environment with both Brittany and Jorge. And I got to, as I mentioned, I got to learn a little bit more about them mentally and where they're at in terms of their preparation day to day, their execution in certain workouts, but also just see how they kind of communicate with each other and support each other. They'll kind of reflect and debrief after every session, it seems like. So I've been super impressed with all of them this year. And I think that it's, for me right now, with what I know about the team division, it's kind of a toss-up between them and Oslo for the favorites heading into this season.
Oslo is always in the conversation. Kristen Holte is a part of their crew, and she's one of the most consistent of all time.
Yeah, and look, those, I mentioned that if Andrea Nisler and Taylor Williamson put a team together, they'll immediately be competitive,
Yeah.
Assuming that they'll get some high-level guys on their team because they're so good on the team side of things, and you can't compete if you don't have strong females on your team. Lena Richter and Ingrid Hodnemer have shown to be the same. Over the last 2 years, every competition they've showed up to, they've been the best or the second best pair of women in the field, and the results echo that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, is this the last year that it'll be in Madison? And then it's moving on to Birmingham, Alabama, right?
This is the last year it'll be in Madison. There's no communication from CrossFit yet about where they will be moving following that. The Morning Chalk-Up reported that they would go to Birmingham, Alabama in the fall. Adrian Bosman has since publicly said, we haven't said where we're going.
Gotcha.
So I'm not gonna make any assumptions about that until I hear it from CrossFit.
That's totally fair. With the expectation of last year's Capitol event that elicited such a community response, has time and time again been shared on different platforms, and a really cool, notable highlight of some of the maybe behind the scenes magic of CrossFit. Do you think that something like that can be recreated again? And do you think that's in between the ears of Adrian Bosman around how creative he can be to elicit that level of community response that was so special last year?
I mean, maybe not in terms of that one event, but Adrian has mentioned that he has, because I think other people have been suggestive of, my goodness, he introduced so many new things in year one. What could he possibly do in year two? And he has said publicly, don't worry, I got years worth of ideas that I've been sitting on. And keep in mind that he's been watching from the co-pilot seat for 15 years as Dave created this thing. He's had the most close-up, intimate view opportunity to even talk to Dave, give suggestions, be shut down with some of those ideas over the years. But he's a very smart man. He's very deliberate, and I'm sure he's written them down, filed them away just in case, just waiting, and now he has that opportunity. I am very confident and excited for what Adrian has in store for year 2. And I think in particular, being the last year at Madison and knowing that going into it, he also has a chance to draw upon some favorites from the past 5 years, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22 in Madison. Obviously 2020, we weren't there. And I think that it would be cool to see 1 or 2 repeat events of some of the most iconic events from year 1 and year 2 at the CrossFit Games. Especially, and I mean the same event. You want to see the first ever event at Madison was run, swim, run. And we got kind of lucky that the rain came down and it was there's some cool shots from that. You could run that exact same event back, see how well the athletes do now compared to then, and get another chance to build in all the, elements of Madison in terms of running on that course, swimming in the lake and everything else. It doesn't have to be that one, but I think he could be clever in pulling back some things that we've already seen and recreating them with the modern group of athletes. But I also have a lot of confidence that he's got something up his sleeve that will leave us with some good memories for 2023 as well.
Yeah, I like that suggestion. So that way you can compare and contrast. It's always fun to see the evolution of fitness over time. And do you think the double under crosses are coming back? Everybody seems to be worried about those things. So they think they're coming back potentially with the drag rope. That was a cool thing from last year. Obviously, you had to make it to that third level in order to even test them. I potentially foresee those things coming up a little bit sooner this year, whether that's at the games or potentially in the qualifying events.
I think Adrian has said we will not see them in the open. I would be very surprised if we saw them in quarterfinals. And I don't necessarily think it's the type of thing I would want to see as the direct qualifier to the games. I do think that it would be appropriate to bring them back in a maybe a day 1 or day 2 at the CrossFit Games where everyone gets to do the test that they're a part of this time around. That was kind of the one thing that I was disappointed in with their appearance there last year, is that we only got to see a couple of the athletes do them, and it turned out that a majority of those select athletes couldn't do them very well. With 1 year under their belt, anyone who is a perennial games athlete or games hopeful will take some, their skill sessions and practice times over the year to make sure that they have those in their pocket should they need them. But having them and then being able to do them with an elevated heart rate or the pressure of a competition is a different story. And that's why I'd like to see them come back. Like, they're in the mix now, but bring them back in a way where everyone gets a chance to do them. Yeah.
HWPO is always making noise. Last time I heard Matt speak, it sounds like they're getting a little bit challenged for space up there in Vermont. And it sounds like he's potentially looking to expand. I know he and Sammy briefly hinted at that a little bit with Lauren Khalil in Miami. What are your thoughts as to the expansion up there? I mean, we're looking at training camps and, they all seem to be growing and evolving in different capacities. You've still got Training Think Tank. You've got Invictus. You've got Mayhem. You've got HWPO. Comp Train still in the mix. What
Proven, Brute,
Proven's absolutely up there.
Training program.
Yep.
The program. There's a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on some of the growth and evolution? Everybody seems to be going and wanting to train with some of the best. And then there's also that subtle back of the mind thought of, I don't actually want to train with my competition. So you got individual athletes wanting to train with team athletes and vice versa. What are your thoughts on the growth of some of these training camps?
I think it's, in some regards, it's kind of a wait and see, because you also think about the athletes that have had sustained success over time, and we'll expand a little bit beyond the Riches and the Matts and the Tias for this conversation. But when you think about athletes like Brent Fikowski, Pat Vellner, Noah Olson, BKG, Cole Sager on the men's side, for example, or on the women's side, if you think about athletes like Kristen Holte, Katrin David's daughter, Carrie Pierce, even Laura Horvath to an extent, that have had success over a period of 5 to 8 years in a row, they have a lot of consistency in their life. Right now, because there's so much opportunity in terms of training camps trying to recruit and agents trying to recruit and sponsors trying to get involved, I think it's a really challenging time to be a young athlete in this sport. And what I'm looking for is someone like Jason Hopper, who has gotten an opportunity, taken it with Nike, with HWPO, with Fraser, and with O'Keefe. He's aligned with his people. And now he seems to be comfortable staying there. If he stays with those 4 as his main 4 for 5 to 7 years, I think he's going to be in the top 10 for 5 to 7 years. If he all of a sudden starts getting some offers and starts getting pulled in different directions year after year, and he takes a chance and goes and trains here for a year and then goes to Europe for a year and then goes to Invictus for a year, I would have less confidence in his sustained success over time. So while there are an abundance of opportunities, based on what I've seen from the athletes who have had successful careers over time, Ben Smith, Scott Panchik, they stay in one place. They stay with what works. They don't put these massive stresses that come with making big changes over time. Even right now, I see Roman Krennikov, who has, in the last few months, gotten rid of his coach of 5 years and gotten rid of his manager in Snorri, who has helped him navigate the landscape to get to where he is now. And he's doing something new. It might end up being good for him, but it's a little bit of a red flag for me relative to the consistency that I've seen breed success year after year after year in this sport. So if I was, I look at a guy like Dallin Pepper, he seems to have planted his flag. He's, whether it's with sponsors, he has some solid sponsors, or with his coach, Matt Torres, and he's moved to Florida. If he does that over the next 5 years, he's a podium threat. If he starts being pulled in a bunch of different directions, I think it inhibits his chances in the long run. And we could obviously fill in many different names on both the men's and women's side in that regard. But even the ones that we talked about with the women, we've talked about what Haley Adams is doing. Brooke Wells is in a great spot with Proven, and she's got Noble and all the things that are in. Like, she has consistency dialed in. I think we can look for good things from her. Gabby Magawa seems to be all over the place this offseason. I'm not even sure who's coaching her. I don't know where she's living. No one seems to know. That's a little bit of a concern for me when you're talking about the small margins at the top of this sport.
Yeah, I mean, consistency has just been such a staple of our conversation, and I always really appreciate your lenses on the sport. I mean, a red flag is a great way to describe that, because the program that works is the one that you do. And when I say the one that you do, I don't just mean the one that you execute, but also the one that you believe in, the one where you feel like your voice matters, that you can collaborate and connect with your coach to learn, evolve, and update and upgrade the program so it's directly applying to your development as an athlete. And just that unique trust factor. Going from place to place, whether that's coaching, sponsors, or location, you're re-navigating trust. You're recreating this buy-in, which takes time. Inevitably, you're going to have a subconscious questioning all the time, and I feel like that bleeds into the mindset of the athlete when they head out to the competition floor to compete. And you and I both know, especially in some of these speed clean ladders or shorter intervals, you don't have time to think. You need unconscious competence. You need to believe that your camp has your back at all costs. And then when you get out there, you got to execute. If it's too much conscious competence and self-doubt and guessing and questioning, inevitably you're going to be a day late and a dollar short.
Part of the Mayhem camp that I was able to participate in last week, they brought in Jim Hensel, who's the guy who's in charge of Mayhem Mindset there. And he spoke about this exact thing. And you kind of nailed it. When it comes to competition, to be able to execute, it's easier to do it when you have less distractions outside of competition. So that's kind of I'm paraphrasing a lot, but he's like, get things in order in your life, and they'll make things easier when you're competing. And the sponsorship, the coach, and the predictability of that over time, the manager, whatever, as that becomes more relevant for the top athletes, are areas that I think if you can find the one that works, stick with it for several years, that you're only increasing the likelihood of doing what you want to do when it comes to competing.
Jordan Peterson says it best. You want to optimize your life, start by cleaning your room.
It's nice coming to a clean room anyway.
For sure, man. Well, Brian, it's always a pleasure crossing paths. I love seeing you at events, maximizing your craft, creating so much value in the sport. I love seeing all the different things that you're doing all the time. Hopefully you can let Sivan know that I'm not AI or artificial intelligence, and he and I can play a little podcast ping pong and chop it up a little bit. What final thoughts do you have heading into the 2023 season with the Open looming about a month out?
Yeah, I mean, on the bigger picture side of things, I really want to believe that we're moving in a good direction. I'm hoping that there's a lot of open participation this year. I'm hoping that the open workouts are both accessible but also fun and challenging. I think that's way more difficult to achieve than it sounds. I have a lot of confidence in Adrian and his ability to do that, and I think that this year is important for him to get those, 3 weeks, 3 workouts, maybe 4, but to get those right for the community as well as the competitors, and start things off on a good foot, because at the more elite level, we're set up for an awesome year. We've talked about the women's side and the opportunity that's there for the 10 best females in the sport this year that maybe hasn't been for several years now. And on the men's side, even though no one's beaten him yet, we've seen that there are guys who are nipping at the heels of the champ, and that whether it's Ricky or Roman or Pat, that Justin's, Jeff Adler, Chandler Smith, second at Rogue, Fikowski had a couple good finishes here, and there's some other guys that are, that are Guy, Lazar. There's a long list of men that are also going to be battling it out. New team division makes for some exciting potential changes and teams that we may see over the next couple of weeks emerge. And so in all 3 divisions, I think we also have the makings of what could be, an epic final season in Madison.
Yeah, for sure. I also can't help but throw out that a lot of these high-level CrossFit athletes are inevitably becoming lifestyle celebrities. And what comes with that is travel, appearances, lack of routine, lack of consistency, pulled in many directions. Still part of the same camp, but lots of different toggling of energy and emotions. With that being said, I definitely think that Kevin Hart talks about it. The most dangerous drug out there is not alcohol, it's not marijuana, it's not heroin, it's not cocaine, it's fame. And what comes with that is a little bit of cluttering of mindset and, like you said, the outside noise, the outside distraction. And so I'm very interested to see how people are able to filter that are at the top, that are participating in lots of these different things based on the expectations of sponsors and their managers and agents. And so with that being said, I absolutely do believe that the top spot on both the men's and women's side is up for grabs.
And it's been a long time since we've been able to say that.
For sure, man. Brian, thanks so much, man. Keep kicking ass. Keep doing all the amazing things that you're doing. I look forward to crossing paths with you soon. For those of you listening or observing on YouTube, if you enjoyed my conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Friend, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become.
Are you over 35 and in need of a solid training program? Are you looking to improve your athleticism and keep up with the younger athletes in your CrossFit gym? Then look no further than our Invictus Masters program. This program places year-round emphasis on mobility and stability exercises with movements that we have seen directly benefit our Masters athletes. Our program is led by Nicole DeHart and offers a training program designed specifically for Masters athletes who are looking to compete at a higher level in the sport of CrossFit. Some of our top Masters athletes in the world train with us, including CrossFit Games champion Kevin Kester, Matt Beals, and Pat Sprague. You can learn more about their stories and the Invictus Masters program by checking out their episodes right here on the Invictus Mindset Podcast. If you'd like more information about the current training cycle or to join the Invictus Masters program, please email Nicole at invictusathlete.com. That's NICHOLE at invictusathlete.com.